You are an orphan and you are weak. You live in a dark place dominated by violence. You know what it is to go hungry, and if you get caught stealing, you lose a hand. What's more, there is no chance of you escaping this cycle of misery. What will you do? Will you accept that fate, or will you manage to become one of those stars that shine despite being surrounded by filth? This is the story of Vlad, an orphan born with nothing, whose life continues to take everything away from him. The story begins on a cold night on the outskirts of a city, where a collapsed building covered in rubble catches the eye. There are no signs of survivors until a hand appears from the rubble. It belongs to Vlad, the protagonist, who frees himself while holding a striking sword. Determined, he repeats that even if it remains hidden, a star will always be a star. But to understand how he got there, we must go back a little. We see Vlad staring mesmerized at a beautiful sword in the window of a shop. It is the same sword as before, and no matter how long he looks at it, he is still as impressed as he was the first time he saw it. He is then interrupted by Zemina, a friend who knew she could find him there. She complains about how distracted he has been lately. Vlad asks her not to bother him as he is enjoying his break, but she insists that this is why there are so many rumors about him. She also asks him if he still hears voices whenever he picks up a stick, a question that will make sense later on. When he doesn't answer, she suggests that he must be very unlucky to have been struck by black lightning on a clear day. She also recommends that he hide for a while, as the new bishop is sensitive to bad omens and will burn anyone he finds suspicious at the stake. Vlad doesn't want to think about it, but Zemina is very worried because many people know what happened with the lightning and think it's strange that he's still alive. He tells her that they won't burn him at the stake just for looking at a sword, but she insists that he buy it. The problem is the price of 5 gold coins. That's enough to not work for a year, and too much for a piece of metal. Their discussion is interrupted by the shopkeeper, who angrily tells them that it's not for poor people like them. Zemina doesn't stay quiet, though, and tells him that he shouldn't try to sell it in the slums. This angers the man even more, and he asks her if she hasn't been taught any manners. She continues to argue with him until Vlad takes Zemina away before the situation escalates. Interestingly, although they don't remember it, they knew the man before. He had taken care of them when they were children during the winter. The blacksmith notices that the ground where the sword was lying has been disturbed, meaning it had been there a long time. He stares at it. He thinks that instead of wasting time on dreams he can never fulfill, Vlad should focus on making ends meet. So he decides to sell the sword to someone who has a chance to get out of that place. That said, he acknowledges that the sword, like Vlad, is a beacon of light in such a dark place. The action takes place in the city of Sora, the economic center of the north, which is protected by the Bayezid family. While it is an impressive place, it also has dark areas, and is in one of these that the protagonist lives, in a neighborhood where all the city's dirty and undesirable elements are discarded. He works at Rose's Smiles, a tavern where alcohol is sold, rooms are rented out, and of course, pleasure services are offered. The trouble starts when a man emerges from his room, dragging a woman and accusing her of being a con artist. She doesn't understand what he means, but he threatens to kill her, catching Vlad's attention. He goes over to see what's going on. However, the man asks to speak to one of the bosses. In order to see them, he has to pay in gold, so he asks to speak to his mother instead. As he is an orphan though, Vlad doesn't take this comment well. The problem is that the girls here charge by the hour, using special candles that last 5 minutes to measure the time. The man insists that the candle went out early and that it's a scam. Vlad tells him that if he doesn't have any money, he should go and have fun with his wife instead. Naturally, the man becomes angrier, so Vlad suggests testing the candles and using a clock to check if they last 5 minutes. If they are fake, he can do whatever he wants with the girl. If not, Vlad will beat him up himself. The man tries to refuse arrogantly, but the protagonist's gaze leaves him paralyzed. His eyes practically force him to obey. He is so frightened that, when the test is over, he has no idea how much time has passed. However, Vlad insists that it has been 5 minutes and begins to beat him brutally. Vlad locks him in one of the rooms and keeps him there until dawn, claiming that he tried to cheat them. The next morning we see him with his boss George, and he admits that the man was right. It hadn't been 5 minutes. He had to lie, which means that someone must have tampered with the candles. The question now is who? His other boss overhears him and becomes quite upset, but finally admits that she was the one who tampered with the candles. We then discover that the woman's name is Marcella, and that it was all just a joke, an experiment to scam drunk people and make more money. Vlad doesn't know what to say and leaves, wondering if he beat up that guy for no reason. As he walks away, he bumps into some colleagues who congratulate him on yesterday's events, especially a braggart who hints that he should give them some of the money he made from the candle sales. The braggart's name is Burlai, and despite his relaxed tone, Vlad senses that he's up to something, so he asks him what he wants. Burlai assures him that he just wants to make a trade. If Vlad gives him some money, Burlai can offer him something very interesting in return. The problem is that what he hands him is a small pickpocket, a clumsy, inexperienced boy who has been beaten up. Burlai asks if he recognizes him, but Vlad already knows the answer. It's Ned, one of the orphans he has taken under his wing. Burley offers to hand him over in exchange for 40 silver coins, and the protagonist only agrees after verifying that the boy is safe. He mentions, to his horror, that next time he should kill him before bringing him back. However, this is only because it isn't the first time he has been extorted. He tells Burley to stop swindling his family. The man doesn't listen to him at all. Happy that he knew Vlad wouldn't refuse the deal, the boy apologizes for getting caught, but the protagonist only asks if he has any broken bones. Seeing that he doesn't, he orders him to leave before he beats him up. It sounds cruel, but what bothers Vlad the most isn't helping the boy. It's the 5 gold coins getting further and further away. Afterwards, we go to the dock where Vlad meets another friend, Harver. Harver works for Captain Hoover's family, and upon hearing what happened to Ned, mentions that he was lucky not to have lost his fingers. Unfortunately, that's what happened to Harver, whose fingers and ankles were mutilated after he was caught stealing. He asks Vlad about the candles, as he has heard rumors and does not believe Marcella is capable of cheating her customers. Vlad agrees, but confirms that it is true. George does not seem surprised by this. Harver then suggests that they must have a reason and estimates that there is a 90% chance that they desperately need the money. If that is true, he must be careful because when such a large organization is looking for money quickly, it can only mean one thing: war. We learn here that the slums of Sora are dominated by 5 bosses, each controlling their own organization or family. These are the Knight of Whores, George, the Pig Butcher, Blackbeard, the Gambler Dice, the Wile Hunter, Captain Hoover, and the Money Leech, One-Armed Jack. This indicates that a dark age is approaching, and that everything is going to hell. Jack himself appears, surrounded by henchmen, and asks the protagonist about his boss. This foreshadows that accidents and destruction will come without warning. The fact that one of the 5 leaders has come in person is not a good sign, and hundreds of questions flood Vlad's mind. Seeing that he is slow to respond, one of the men becomes violent, so the boy insists that he is just a candle seller. Unfortunately, this only serves to unleash the man's anger. He throws the candles on the ground and yells at Vlad, claiming that he is unaware of the situation he is in. Vlad simply gets up to pick the candles up, however, and seems calm until the man orders him to move, looking at him with cold, threatening eyes. Realizing that Vlad sees him as little more than a worm is the last straw. He attacks, but the protagonist is faster and grabs his weapon of choice, a stick, or rather, a wooden sword. To Vlad, a fight is a microcosm of war. The battlefield, the circumstances, and a bold determination. That's all it takes to win. He responds quickly, defeating his opponent with just 2 well-placed blows. Everyone's expression changes, especially Jack's, who smiles excitedly. It's clear that a slum rule has just been fulfilled. The winner stands on top and the loser lies on the ground. At that moment, the others prepare to fight, but Jack stops them, saying that he really likes the protagonist. In a sarcastic tone, he apologizes for the noise and claims to be just a simple one-armed man. Vlad replies that he does not discriminate against disabled people. This amuses the man, who cannot believe that someone could be so deranged as to speak to him so lightly. Becoming more serious, he insists that they talk in private later. Then he makes a threat, wondering aloud which beggar took the last one. He implies that if he can't remember, it's because he died too soon. Fortunately, they are interrupted by George, who lightens the mood by saying that if he had known they were coming, he would have prepared a nice dinner. Jack insists that they're not that close, but agrees to talk in his office in exchange for a drink. Although we could view this as an interaction between 2 old friends, nothing could be further from the truth, given that they are looking at each other so intensely that it is clear that things are about to become complicated. Vlad sighs with relief as he almost didn't make it. However, what's confusing is that Jack leaves George's office in high spirits after a while. In a relaxed tone, he tells Vlad that his boss spoke highly of him and offered him a job in his company. Vlad doesn't consider it, since George pays well, but Jack laughs and tells him he can offer more. In fact, the man gives him a gold coin to cover the cost of the candles. Vlad tells him it's too much, but Jack insists that if he works for him, he'll give him that and more. He says goodbye to everyone with a smile. Did things go well? Vlad wonders. The answer comes sooner than expected when George sends for him to give him an impressive dagger as a gift. Vlad is speechless, but the real problem is the reason why. George had planned to give it to him later, but the current situation has forced him to hand it over sooner than expected. George insists that Vlad keeps it with him at all times. Combined with the tension in the room, this gives Vlad all the answers he needs. The conversation between George and Jack was a disaster. Unfortunately, they can't admit this out loud, as George keeps telling Vlad that his job won't be limited to selling candles from now on. It turns out that Jack has been hiring outsiders, mercenaries who used to be knights and who are better than any bandit. Vlad asks if they are people like George, implying that he is also a former knight. George confirms this. This means that the upcoming war is precisely between George and Jack, who is taking extreme measures to overcome the obstacle that George represents. While a flock of sheep would be no match for a wolf, if Jack brings in swordsmen of his own caliber, the balance is tipped in his favor. George admits that they are at a disadvantage, which is why he needs the protagonist. to whom he will soon assign his first mission. Vlad is willing to help, and he remembers his friend Harvin, who has managed to get ahead despite his disability. He understands that the only way to learn is through effort, which always takes you further. Participating in the war means he has to train, and that's what he does. However, he hears a voice advising him on the angle he should attack at. Surprisingly, Vlad just obeys, accustomed to this presence. It is at this point that the conversation with Zemina becomes relevant, as a month ago, after being struck by black lightning, Vlad began to hear a mysterious voice. Demonic whispers invade his mind whenever he picks up a sword or a stick. Despite being used to it, he tries to ignore them, thinking that the more he responds, the more they will bother him. Training also involves focusing his mind and strength on each movement, but that's where things get weird for his next strike. He and the mysterious voice think the same thing. Attack! It sounds simple, but the impact is different. It's not just a swing, but a route and a path for the sword. At that moment, Vlad has a vision of an unknown figure, which makes him wonder what on earth is going on in his head. Next, there's a time jump and we find ourselves in a snowy forest. There, a mysterious swordsman is cleaning his sword after killing an enemy. He hears footsteps approaching and mocks whoever it is, saying they must be stupid to attack him. When he receives no response, he calls out to them to come forward. We then discover that it is the protagonist, who asks if he is Mr. Stanga. The swordsman confirms this and recognizes the protagonist as a guide from the slums. He was waiting for him. This was the mission he had been sent on to recruit Stanga. Vlad hands him a letter from George, asking for his help in the war. The boy clarifies that he will be his guide and they will arrive in 2 days. Stanga jokes that he's not sure he wants to follow someone so stupid. Vlad insists that he can guide the man down the right path. In response, the man tries to intimidate Vlad with a look similar to the one he usually reserves for his enemies. However, Vlad ignores him and asks him to maintain the pace, as he doesn't want to jeopardize his first mission. The man notices this indifference and laughs when he sees that Vlad has reacted calmly to his intimidation techniques. He understands why George likes the boy. He is worthy of attention. Vlad and Stanga then follow the established route, stopping to rest when necessary. At one of the camps, Stanga asks Vlad why he is staring at him, and if he has never met a retired knight before. The protagonist admits that he has never seen one up close before, prompting the man to mock him and call him a simple peasant. However, Vlad does not let him get away with it and quickly returns the joke. Stanga threatens to cut him in two, but the subject changes completely when Vlad takes out the delicious-looking food he was given for the journey. There is no portion for Stanga. The former knight is disappointed and looks at his own food with disgust. After trying to resist the temptation, Stanga succumbs to the delicious smell of Vlad's food. He tells Vlad that he will answer all his questions in exchange for a few pieces of meat. The man insists that it is a unique opportunity, but the boy does not believe him. He tells the man that if he wants food, he only has to ask for it. This is important, as Stanga insists that knights only receive things when they have given something in return. Bearing this in mind, Vlad asks him 3 questions: his name, his age, and whether he knows how to use the aura. The man answers without hesitation. His name is Stanga and he is 42 years old. The rest will have to wait. The fact that the protagonist asked him that question suggests that he is not as innocent as he thought. He clarifies that not all knights can control their aura, and using it in a real fight is completely different. When Vlad asks if he can use it, Stanga offers to teach him. The prospect excites the boy so much that he agrees to give Stanga all his food. The man repeats that a knight should only take what he has given, but he will make an exception and accept the food. He prepares to demonstrate his mastery of the aura, and the mere idea excites Vlad so much that he stands still as Stanga begins with some seemingly simple movements. What catches the protagonist's eye is that Stanga covers one of his eyes. Just as Vlad is about to ask him why, the atmosphere around Stanga changes and he begins to recite a kind of mantra. "I need to draw my world from the depths of my soul." He then asks the protagonist to watch closely. This is the essence of knighthood. When he opens the eye he had closed, the magic begins as both his sword and body emit a strong wave of energy, the aura. They then continue on their established route until they reach the slums at night. Stanga comments that he feels dirty as they win their way through several filthy alleys, but Vlad says that this is the best way to avoid standing out. Stanga wasn't actually referring to his appearance, though. He disliked having to sneak around. Vlad insists it's a necessary evil as their mission is to escort him secretly, meaning they can't go through the front door. In an attempt to cheer Stanga up, Vlad promises to prepare a hot bath. However, everything goes downhill when they encounter an uncomfortable silence, followed by hundreds of bodies scattered across the streets. This confirms that the war has begun, so Vlad suggests they split up. He will continue along the main route, while Stanga will take a secret route to the tavern. Fortunately, the protagonist arrives safely, but upon arrival he comes face to face with a horrific scene. The place is destroyed and covered in blood. George is in the center, congratulating him on completing his mission and confirming the obvious Jack attacked first. Furthermore, the men he hired are on another level. Although the protagonist was able to fight them off, it had been a long time since he had fought someone of such caliber. George also asks about Stanga. The boy confirms that Vlad sent him on the secret route, so he should arrive soon. With Stanga's help, they will have the opportunity to turn the tide of the war. George announces that they will attack tomorrow to end it once and for all. When asked about the man, Vlad replies that he is fine. He seems like a good person, he is quite agile, and has great aura control. They can therefore be sure that things will turn out better than expected. However, George's smile disappears with that last sentence. The man turns pale, and when Vlad warns them that Stanga is approaching, he asks if he really saw him use the aura. The boy confirms this, and then things change as George prepares for battle. He asks the man to cover himself and reveals that the Stanga he knows doesn't know how to use the aura. Before Vlad can grasp what is happening, the supposed Stanga enters, his sword stained with blood. Although the protagonist has no idea who he really is, the man recognizes George and tells him that he hasn't seen him in a long time. The fake Stanga wipes his sword in a manner reminiscent of when we first saw him. It is now clear that the man he killed was the real Stanga. This is how he discovered that it was George who had sent Vlad, and he exploited this information to trick him. George does not welcome him and prepares to attack after asking why he has come looking for him right now. That's when things get complicated, as the stranger reveals that Count Gaydar has died. This news has not yet been made public due to complications, but everyone will find out soon. As George's anger grows, the man pours himself a drink and raises a toast to the deceased. It's unclear whether this is sarcastic, but this ends up being the last straw for George, who attacks without hesitation. However, the stranger is so quick that he manages to dodge the blow, leaving George to cut the glass in two while he emerges unscathed. He then adds that a new count has already been chosen, a man named Sigmund. George continues to attack, but the white-haired man is incredibly fast and manages to block him again. Thanks to George, we discover that the man's real name is Godin, and that he has come on Count Sigmund's orders. The renegade knight, George, must return immediately. George replies that Sigmund is not his lord. Godin explains that the Count knows George will not return willingly and does not expect him to. In other words, the real order is to kill him. A brutal battle ensues, with every blow powerful enough to kill, so the protagonist asks Marcella to flee. They run to the ground floor, where they meet the rest of their comrades from the organization. They ask what is happening. Vlad warns them that George is in danger and asks them to protect him. However, before they can react, George is thrown through a wall and lands on the ground in full view of everyone. Godin approaches him from behind and tells him that he is still as knave as ever. He stands and watches him try to get up, but he is not very successful. Taking advantage of the distraction, Vlad throws his knife at Godin, who blocks it. Godin stares at Vlad for a few seconds before continuing on his way towards his real target, George. Vlad orders the man to move, and thanks to this distraction, is able to dodge the next blow. However, it is obvious to everyone that the battle is over. Realizing he has the upper hand, Godin asks why he didn't follow orders that day. We don't know what he's referring to, but George's answer is clear. He's a human being and won't follow stupid orders like that. Godin is just as direct in his response of "No, you're a gentleman." He points out that the night has gone on long enough and that he just wants to rest now. Suddenly, he closes one of his eyes, and Vlad knows what that means. He runs towards Godin trying to stop him, but it's too late. In what seems like a fraction of a second, a strong colored energy begins to emanate from his sword, the aura. Vlad begs him not to do it, but he doesn't listen, taking a moment to finish off everyone in the room. Meanwhile, Vlad was the only one out of reach of the attack. He was condemned to watch as the others didn't even have time to react. 1 second they were standing, the next, the entire tavern had been transformed into a graveyard. By the time Godin had deactivated his aura, the protagonist could barely make sense of what had happened. All he could see were the bleeding bodies of his companions. He saw that George was still alive, but before he could run to him, Godin cut off his head. And then, something inside Vlad broke. Lying in front of him was the body of the first person to reach out to the boy who wandered through the slum's filth, the first person to recognize him, the strongest person he had ever seen. George was his idol, his family, everything he had. But that night, the blue moonlight shattered the boy's world into 1,000 pieces. The worst part was that Godin took George's head as if it were an object, with such indifference that Vlad picked up one of the swords from the ground and attacked without hesitation. A mysterious voice in his head told him to stop, but he didn't. Although his blow doesn't hurt Godin, the latter recognizes the way of the sword in him. The man wonders how a kid from the slums knows the way of the sword. With a look full of anger, he says only one thing impressive. Vlad continues to attack, demanding that Godin die. Godin only responds with a kick strong enough to kill anyone. More surprises follow as the protagonist manages to survive, and Godin realizes that he was born with talent, instinctively twisting his body to avoid being hit squarely. Vlad writhes in pain as the mysterious voice instructs him to keep breathing. Godin decides that killing such a talented fighter would be a waste right now. Even if Vlad manages to get stronger and come back for him, he'll let him live. This reminds Godin of one of George's teachings. You have to look after those with potential. With a mocking smile on his face, Godin approaches the boy and reminds him that a gentleman only takes what he is owed. He returns the flesh he had given him in exchange for the lies earlier, but says that he will take George's head as the victor's prize. When faced with this, Vlad simply states that he will kill him. However, the man tells him that, as things stand, he will not be able to. To the boy, however, it is not just a threat, but a promise. He just has to wait. He will kill Godin, even if it's the last thing he does. Then he and Zemina flee through the empty alleys, him carrying her while trying to endure the pain from the blow. The aftermath is unbearable, both physically and mentally. After the beating and seeing George die, he is devastated. Marcella encouraged him to get up and asked if he was going to stay there and die. When he didn't react, she became angry and hit him. She insisted that the only difference between the people in the city center and them was opportunities. Those guys get back up, they on the other hand. All this death and destruction is the result of failing just once. They are destined for that fate, but a unique opportunity to survive presents itself, so they must seize it. Back in the present, the memory of that conversation motivates him to keep going despite the pain. However, they are discovered by Jack's men, who begin to chase them. The situation is clear, they have nowhere to go back to. They are now two young people who must rise into the sky on their own. They manage to slip away, and we see that the search is being led by the man who humiliated him earlier. He insists that they must find them. Vlad and Zemina take refuge in a house, but they know it's only a matter of time before they are caught. Vlad asks Zemina to return when things have calmed down, as it is too dangerous for them to travel together. She insists on staying together, but he reminds her that his promise to Marcella was to help him escape, nothing more. He can't protect her right now. This makes the girl burst into tears. They are discovered by someone, however, and she grabs a knife, ready to fight. Fortunately, it's only the old blacksmith who asks them what they are doing there. Zemina tries to threaten him, but when she sees the desperation in his eyes, she asks him to calm down, saying that he doesn't plan to hurt them. Nevertheless, he insists that he hand over the sword, explaining that Vlad will need it if he wants to survive outside the city. The protagonist looks at her in astonishment, but understands that this is life in the slums, where people are forced to steal to survive. The blacksmith thinks that he was once the same, and that now it is Zemina's turn to become a beast in order to protect her own. He says it's sad, but doesn't move to get the sword. Zemina therefore tightens her grip on the knife, preparing to attack. However, instead of hurting him, she cuts her own hair, hands it to him in tears, and says that it's not enough payment, but that she'll make sure to give him the money later. The blacksmith remains silent and asks our hero if he is leaving. Vlad replies that he is, and the blacksmith knows it. Vlad will finally be able to leave this place and do what he has dreamed of all his life. This is why the blacksmith decides to help him, not only by giving him the sword, but also by taking him to the dump, the only way out without being detected. Unfortunately, halfway there, they are intercepted by Jack's men, who complain that their stupid fights have prevented them from throwing out the trash in peace. They notice that he is accompanied, and the man claims he has hired a helper, which seems to allay their suspicions. Nevertheless, they need to check their identities and remove the hood of the man accompanying him. Fortunately, it is Zemina, whom they do not recognize, as our protagonist is hidden among the rubbish. They let them go, and the old man seizes the opportunity to ask who they are looking for. He confirms that they are after Vlad. This prompts them to insist on searching the cart again, and one of the men must search inside it. This complicates matters, because now they're really in trouble. In fact, the man finds Vlad and begs him not to hate him, just before repeatedly attacking him. Fortunately, he is aiming for the exact spot so as not to hurt him. He tells Vlad that Harvin has put a decoy boat in the river to draw the attention of those who are looking for him. He then lets them continue on their way, revealing that he didn't betray him because he is Ned's brother, and this is payment for the 40 he used to help him. Vlad thanks him, and they arrive at a large landfill overlooking an area outside the city. Zemina says goodbye and tells him to take care. The protagonist is thrown away like trash and heads towards his freedom. We return to the opening scene and realize that it wasn't a collapse, but a landfill site. Vlad holds a star made by the blacksmith from the dreams and shining tears of his best friend. He manages to escape and flees into the forest, where he asks the mysterious voice if it can hear him. It replies that it can't. When Vlad asks who it is, however, it confesses that it doesn't know. The voice seems to have a lot to say about swords, but nothing about itself. The boy thinks this is for the best. The voice offers to help him recover his memories and asks him to become his sword. It no longer matters whether he is a demon or a figment of his imagination. What he really fears is becoming nothing in the face of the monster waiting for him. Once this is settled, the voice agrees and tells him he needs to know about his sword and how to become a true swordsman. Time moves on. We move to a military camp led by Joseph, the second son of the Bayezid family. His assistant, a knight named Giudger, arrives and senses his frustration. Joseph admits that he is bothered by how simple the mission is. They have achieved good results by subjugating monsters with minimal casualties, but they have not done anything particularly impressive to prove his leadership. His father and family will surely doubt him, especially Rudiger, his older half-brother, and the next in line to become count if Joseph does not succeed. Throughout history, the Bayezids have glorified the military to such an extent that his father and uncles sacrificed themselves for glory. Joseph needs more skilled swordsmen like Jaeger. The knight takes the opportunity to tell Joseph about a suspicious soldier. He's not a spy, but Jaeger will have to see for himself. Jaeger takes him to where the defeated monsters are hung, where he observes the horrible wounds on their bodies. They look like the work of a novice swordsman, but the strange thing is that the same wounds are repeated exactly on dozens of corpses. They have the same trajectory and depth, as if they had been inflicted by the same person. Jaeger confirms that they are the work of a mercenary who has only been around for 1 month. Joseph immediately asks who this person is. We then cut to the battlefield, where a fierce battle is being fought against a group of goblins. They order their troops to adjust formation to prevent escape, and one soldier confidently declares that they are making good progress. Suddenly, he is killed by a giant. This is not the kind of enemy they were expecting. In a matter of seconds, he has wiped out the group. The general orders them to advance, but the deal with the mercenaries did not include such a formidable opponent. The only person who plans to continue fighting is Rayman, also known as the Praying Man. The protagonist, who only says, "I'll do it," is curious. He lunges at the creature, taking it by surprise, and cuts its back with agility. It was only a superficial cut, however, and at that moment, the voice warns him of the next blow. Luckily, he manages to dodge it, taking a step back to prepare himself while the voice scolds him for not following its instructions exactly. However, he doesn't do so because he still can't, claiming that he has taken the long way. They exchange a few more blows until he finally concentrates and gathers his energy, saying, "Well, cut it." The monster senses the threat, but it's too late as the protagonist decapitates him with a single blow. Meanwhile, Joseph asks Jaeger to find out everything he can about this Rayman, who could be useful to them. After the battle, the protagonist, who is now a captain, collects the enemy bodies and is congratulated by his subordinate. When he asks him to stop talking and load his loot, the guy tries to invite him to work together again. Vlad refuses to get involved in fraud. There is silence, but the man persists, arguing that he shouldn't continue to use a mercenary badge. The protagonist silences him with a look, thinking that if he tries to threaten him, he won't hesitate to kill him. The man freezes. It was only a suggestion, but Vlad insists that he either shut up or lose his head. The man says goodbye, and the protagonist realizes that he will have to take action against him to escape the group. Everyone assumes he is going to pray, hence his nickname, and we see that they also believe he is a nobleman. Of course, they couldn't be more wrong. He is going to talk to the voice, which keeps scolding him for his actions in battle. The problem is that the instructions are unclear, full of who's and was that he never quite understands. Some mercenaries join him in his supposed prayers, and back at camp, he complains about the food while the others claim they are lucky. Vlad lets them finish and goes to see the priest, a kind old man named Andres, who congratulates him on praying despite the cold. The protagonist accompanies him, and at that moment, an altar boy signals that breakfast is ready and invites Vlad to join them. They pray briefly, and the priest is moved by the protagonist's devotion despite the chaos of battle. He has not lost his faith. Therefore, he offers to guide him so that he does not lose his faith, while all Vlad can think about is the tremendous feast. The man congratulates Joseph on his skill with the sword and mentions that he has been asked by Joseph to recommend him. Eager to see how Joseph will grow, he decides to do so. He reminds him that the Bayazids are very influential in the north and that he should seize the opportunity. However, this is not good for Vlad's plans, as he thinks he may have attracted too much attention. The voice says that they had no choice. He needed to teach him through real experience. Perhaps the problem was talking so much with the priest. However, the protagonist also had to be nearby to ensure that the voice wasn't an evil entity. As he didn't notice anything strange, he should be fine. He asks if it would be best to leave, given that he is using the false identity of a corrupt mercenary he murdered. In short, if they are discovered, he is in trouble, so they decide to flee that night. Vlad even considers adopting another identity, but they sense the presence of a knight Jaeger. Instinctively, Vlad goes on the defensive, and Jaeger is surprised that he noticed him from a distance. Jaeger announces that Joseph wishes to see him, so Vlad puts on his best poker face and says it will be a pleasure. Jaeger, for his part, is impressed that Vlad, despite being young, is not intimidated by him. Without further ado, Jaeger asks him to follow him. At that moment, the protagonist considers running away, but a voice warns him not to try, as a knight of Jaeger's caliber could kill him in seconds. Ultimately, he has no choice but to meet with Joseph, who begins with the usual cordial questions and mentions that, based on his features, he thought he was from a noble family. He then asks if his name is Rayman. Vlad replies yes, but Jaeger suddenly hits him. The black-haired man clarifies that he hates layers, and that he already knows who he is, Vlad of Sora. He knows that his mother was a single parent, but he hasn't found any information about his father. He asks Vlad if he knows anything. Vlad grimly replies that it's not very smart to ask that of a bastard, and Jaeger attacks him again, leaving him on the ground. Joseph tells him to watch his manners, but he laughs at the joke and points out that he also knows why Vlad ran away from Sora. He says that those eyes hide a lot, and that what matters is where he learned to use the sword. He threatens to cut off Vlad's head if he doesn't answer. Vlad hesitantly replies that he had a teacher who came and disappeared like lightning, never revealing his name, but telling him about the secret of a man who always wins, that must not be revealed to anyone. Seeing his unwavering gaze, Joseph apologizes for his rudeness and confesses that he really wants to make him an offer the opportunity to rise to a higher place. Power, freedom, survival, chivalry. He can have it all, for Joseph has decided to support him. His training will begin with Jaeger, who will become his new master. Curious onlookers watch the training session and notice that Vlad is skilled and has a bright future ahead of him. Jaeger doesn't make it easy for him, of course, calling him arrogant and making it clear that he has a lot to learn. However, it is impressive that he can dodge his blows and keep up with him. The others notice this too, but Vlad knows that Jaeger is holding back. After the first confrontation, Jaeger announces that they will practice twice a day, and everyone is excited by the prospect, as Jaeger is a formidable opponent who cuts off all their movements mercilessly. He claims that being beaten is the way to learn, which does not please the protagonist. However, when Joseph meets Jaeger and asks about Vlad, the knight concludes that he could be useful. He also suggests that Joseph could attract the Count's attention if he were a nobleman, which excites him, even though Jaeger warns him about his arrogance. In any case, they have time to teach Joseph manners, and they will take care of it themselves. Nevertheless, Jaeger insists that he is not to be trusted. However, Joseph is not worried about that. He will let time reveal what is inside him. Vlad told him that there is something he must do no matter what to be honest and have his own goals. The boy may act like a wolf, but they will build him a huge cage so he confuses captivity with freedom. Meanwhile, we see the reckless guy from earlier patrolling the camp, thinking about how great it must be to train with Jaeger. He is interrupted by one of his superiors, who orders him to pull himself together while he checks on another area. Everything proceeds normally until the reckless guy overhears his superior talking to a woman who is looking for a child. He thinks she's crazy, but then there is complete silence. When he approaches, he sees his superior walking towards the forest. The worst part is that he is surrounded by a dark fog bearing the face of a woman. Back with Vlad, he complains about the training, thinking that Jaeger is just taking advantage of him. Then the voice reminds him that this is a unique opportunity he must seize. At that moment, Gut, the reckless man, calls him over and asks to speak to him in secret. Vlad realizes that Gut is the only person from his team who has returned. Gut reveals that he is going to run away and warns Vlad that he should leave too. Noticing the protagonist's confusion, he informs him that the forest they are conquering is cursed and reminds him that several mercenaries supposedly deserted. However, he believes that the forest took them. They are not deserters, they are missing. He knows this because he has seen it happen, a ghost that takes people away. Vlad doesn't believe him, of course, but Gut reveals that someone disappeared the night before, Sir Roderick, a very trustworthy man. Gut also notices that all the missing people have black hair. This detail seems useless, but it catches Jaeger's attention and he begins a search mission. Together they venture into the forest, and Jaeger asks if they can trust Gut. Vlad replies that he doesn't, but Gut isn't crazy either. While Jaeger worries that he may be the next victim, Joseph sees this as an opportunity to discover something unusual that will help him stand out. Vlad notices this and mentions that several people stayed behind to look after Joseph, but considering that even Roderick has disappeared, the enemy must be powerful. They finally reach Roderick's team, who explain that they searched for him all night without success, despite his great mercenary skills, so he orders them to split into groups of 3 to expand the search. They spend the entire afternoon exploring, and Jaeger realizes that Vlad's experience of the city is not very useful for this type of work. As the sun begins to set, they wonder if they should return, but then decide to search beyond the frozen river. Gut confesses that, as far as he knows, Roderick didn't go any further. However, as they found nothing in the forest, Jaeger orders all the soldiers to gather in order to cross the river. When they arrive, they see that it is not fully frozen, but they can cross it if they are careful. The key will be to spread out to avoid putting too much pressure on it. Everyone agrees, although Gut has a bad feeling. Vlad tells him that he is just scared, but Gut insists that someone as weak as him can only survive by following his instincts. His instincts are now telling him that they should not cross. The protagonist replies that doesn't understand premonitions, but if he runs away, he won't die honorably. Would he be the only one to run away from a serious incident? They would beat him up for it, so it's better to keep quiet and follow him. Gut begins to move forward, repeatedly saying it's a bad idea. Vlad warns him that if he keeps talking, he'll break the ice himself. Ultimately, fear paralyzes him. When the protagonist approaches to drag him away, Gut screams in despair because he has just seen the lifeless corpses of all the missing people at the bottom of the river. But that's not the worst of it. They begin to rise, breaking the ice and coming to the surface like the living dead. Within seconds, they realize they have been surrounded. When they ask Jaeger for orders, he understands that it has been a carefully laid trap, as if they knew they were coming. At that moment, they face the night and the darkness. 2 things denied to the living and reserved for the dead. Back at the camp, Andres is praying diligently next to the altar boy when he begins to tremble with fear. He notices that the holy water in the cup is becoming turbulent and emitting a dark energy. He knows that something is coming. On the outskirts, a fog begins to spread as the mysterious woman advances, asking for her child. The battle against the undead continues on the river, and Vlad destroys one of them with a single move. He saves Gut from certain death and annihilates several more, but there are too many enemies to keep up with. Yelling at Gut to get up and fight, Vlad tries to calm himself down, but his own nervousness is increasing. No matter how hard he fights, he cannot advance and wonders if Jaeger is safe. Meanwhile, Jaeger is doing remarkably well, finishing off dozens of enemies with just a few moves. Like Vlad, he can't advance no matter how hard he fights, and he realizes that this is a deliberate ploy to keep them away from the camp. There's no time, so he unleashes his aura, a wave of green energy that enhances his movements brutally. This excites the others, but Jaeger knows this is not the priority and asks Vlad to protect Joseph. The protagonist agrees and takes Gut with him. While while Jaeger prays that they will make it in time. Unfortunately, he is left to control the situation here, which includes killing his old friend Roderick. Back at the camp, Joseph reads until he hears fighting outside his tent. He thinks they are under attack, a suspicion that is confirmed when a general arrives to protect him. Not knowing what is happening, Joseph understands that the priority is to protect him. The problem is that the poor man doesn't have his sword with him, which angers Joseph because he thinks he is incompetent. At that moment, Andreas arrives with other soldiers and informs Joseph that they are under attack from evil. He knows this thanks to his Bible, written in holy ink, which is trembling as if it has a life of its own in the face of the threat. He will try to unleash all his divine powers, but he is not an exorcist, so they will probably not be enough to stop the enemy. Furthermore, there is no one in the camp who knows how to wield the aura, so they will have to manage alone. When they leave the tent, they see a thick fog that causes the soldiers to go delirious and start screaming. Andreas says that the fog is not natural. Even though they cover their noses, they begin to feel its effects too. They see the woman who is still looking for her son. The sight leaves them paralyzed, and things get worse when she sees Joseph and runs towards him, shouting, "Oh, I've finally found you, my child." End of chapter 10. The creature was actually about to reach Joseph if it weren't for an energy barrier that had risen to protect him. This barrier was raised by Andreas and the altar boy, who began to pray and sing sacred songs to keep the woman away. Joseph wonders what happened to Jaeger and sees that 2 of the knights who had gone to protect him have fallen. Given the effect of Andreas' blessings, it is clear that they are facing a curse full of hatred directed at Joseph. The question is, who could hate him so much? The curse is so powerful that the altar boy finds it difficult to continue, and he begins to bleed from his throat, which weakens the barrier. At that moment, the curse tries to pierce her, but she continues singing, knowing they won't be able to hold out much longer. Joseph realizes this and wonders if it is the end. Then he sees the protagonist approaching at full speed. The woman realizes this too and turns to attack him. The voice deduces that she is under the curse's control and that a normal sword won't harm her. That's why, minutes earlier, he asked Vlad if he could use his aura. Knowing the answer would be no, he told him there was another option, to take over his body during the fight. He is sure that he can use his aura. His only doubt is whether he will be able to do so in his body. However, they have no choice but to take the risk. If they fail, the woman will kill them. But knowing this is the way of the sword and that he has a promise to keep, Vlad agrees. He remembers that there is still something he must take his revenge. He has sworn to devote himself to this, not with loyalty, but with faith. The voice respects his decision and they both attack. Vlad controls the body and instructs the protagonist to close his right eye. At that moment, the protagonist is transported to the world of voices while the voice manifests all that energy in physical form and attacks the woman, leaving a mark on her chest full of aura. Everyone is surprised by this display of strength, but his body can barely tolerate it and he falls to the ground, writhing in pain. Joseph screams in concern, certain that he saw Era, that the protagonist's body will pay a high price for it. Unfortunately, this isn't enough to finish off the woman, who begins to crawl towards him. Blinded by pain, Vlad doesn't notice, but Joseph does. He puts himself at risk to help Vlad, and the woman takes advantage of this to grab his foot. Vlad is paralyzed with fear, wondering if he is too weak to escape. However, the other knight takes care of getting them out of there by throwing them towards the barrier. Joseph is glad to have him on their side for the first time. Most importantly, Vlad asks the priest to bless his sword, as they must purge the woman. The priest agrees and covers it with his own blood, a powerful blessing that should help. With that settled, the protagonist approaches the woman and reveals that he could briefly see what had happened to her. She was locked away from her children in a dark prison and forced to watch them die slowly. The suffering and hatred she experienced turned her into a curse, so Vlad stabs her with his blessed sword and allows her to rest in peace. That concludes chapter 11. However, this curse was being controlled by someone else, a sorcerer who had taken advantage of her and forced her to act. We see the culprit up to his old tricks until the curse's energy disappears, revealing that the woman's spirit has moved on. He is surprised, as she could only be defeated with aura. However, he is found by Jaeger, who kills him and brings his head to Joseph when everything calms down. Jaeger also gives Joseph the object he used to control the woman, a copper plate containing the bones of the sorcerer's son. This must be given to the priest for investigation. Joseph declares the mission a failure, of course, but he gains something positive of Vlad, the person who will replace him as a spy and become a swordsman capable of shining above all others. Speaking of the devil, he wakes up after 3 days, at which point a voice warns them to be more careful next time. The voice also mentions that they are waiting for him to leave, especially Joseph, who is very concerned about him. By the time he leaves, most of the mercenaries have gone, except for Dot, who was given a pay rise for surviving such madness. Dot fills him in on everything and asks him to speak well of him to Joseph, who is waiting for him in the barracks. There, the nobleman serves him wine. It is the first time Vlad has tasted quality liquor, so he thanks the nobleman for saving his life and for not running away. Vlad simply reminds Joseph that they have a contract, faith instead of loyalty. Deep down, however, Joseph is surprised that he kept his word and recognizes that it is a talent he should keep to himself. In that case, Joseph will reward him according to his achievements and even invite him to formally join the Bayezid household. They then move to Varna, where they prepare the expedition report. Vlad is excited to be in a city other than Sora for the first time. Joseph gives him the day off, but Giger clarifies that they are expected back at dusk. Vlad can see that the hatred between the two is mutual. The voice mocks him, but all he wants is to find something decent to eat. Suddenly, an altar boy approaches him and informs him that the priest has invited him to a meeting in the enormous main church, the religious center of the Bayazids. Once inside, Vlad realizes that he has never truly prayed before, which makes him feel guilty. However, this feeling passes when the priest gives him a small gift, a church ID that will open doors for him across the continent, as the priest is acting as his guarantor. The man's promise to help him moves him, as he remembers being born in the nameless, unregistered alleys. But with this identification, he is officially someone. He is no longer known as Vlad of the slums. Now he is Vlad of Sora and of Chapter 12. We then learn that the Bayazid lands include 12 villages and 3 cities. The distribution center of Sora, the religious center of Varna, and the capital city of Sturma. This is the final destination, and Vlad is impressed. Meanwhile, Jaeger warns him and Got that they are now Joseph's guests. This means not embarrassing Joseph, and given that the protagonist has a big appetite, Jaeger asks them to control themselves and not eat anything. They are supposed to wait in an extremely elegant hall, where they are greeted by someone who neither knows nor expects to see them. The man approaches them and asks who they are. However, Vlad is paralyzed when he notices that the man's aura is extraordinary, as if he could split a person in two with his gaze. God introduces himself as part of Joseph's expedition, while the protagonist simply introduces himself as Vlad of Sora, surprising the man with his fierce gaze and confidence. Thinking Joseph has found someone useful, he only offers them peanuts. Vlad refuses, having been ordered not to eat anything. God is stunned, thinking that the orders of a high-ranking official cannot be disobeyed. The man is also surprised, although he says nothing. We then discover that he is Rudiger, Joseph's older brother. He tells his father about Vlad, who tells him that if he can turn him into a good knight, he will reward him. However, he reminds him that swordsmanship is not his forte and that he must not forget his position. He asks if Joseph feels better, and Joseph says yes, bringing the conversation to an awkward end. When he is left alone with his assistant, an old man named Ragmus, he asks him to fetch medicine. They then focus on discussing Joseph's report, acknowledging that strange things have happened and that they must find out what is behind them. Andreas has also submitted his report, revealing that the attack was a combination of resurrection and cursing techniques, the work of a powerful dark master or several wizards, most likely belonging to an organization. In any case, he claimed the Bayazids will remain invincible. This is just an obstacle that must be overcome. He concludes by saying that they must find the Bayazids soon and make them pay. That night, Joseph meets with the boys and tells Got that he can stay, adding that they will discuss his payment the following day. Vlad thanks him again for saving him and asks if he would be willing to dedicate his sword to Joseph. The protagonist agrees, but he has a personal goal, so Joseph asks him to be honest, so that Joseph can see how he can help him. Vlad hesitates, but finally tells Joseph that he must assassinate a knight who resembles the blue light of the moon god in Degaidar. And that's the end of chapter 13. Joseph realizes that there is more to Vlad than meets the eye. Joseph asks if Godin was responsible for destroying his smile. The protagonist confirms this, explaining that Godin killed his benefactor and destroyed his entire world. Despite this, he can't help but admire Godin. Joseph admits that he can't help him. Godin is beyond his reach, as Vlad expected given that he is only the son of a count. Nevertheless, Joseph offers to amend the contract. His honor as a nobleman is at stake, yet he promises him a bright future in exchange for 7 years of service. During that time, Joseph will feed and train him to become a knight. In return, all he has to do is be loyal to Joseph and put the matter of Godin on hold. He can do whatever he wants, as long as it takes place in the alleys of Sora. Joseph even offers to help him with Zemina, who is in a convent. Joseph will give him power and be his ally. Although he does not know how to use a sword, Joseph also has his own weapon. Finally, he asks what he intends to do, and Vlad agrees. Joseph thinks that killing Godin is a very ambitious goal, but Giger mentions that he can still find other useful boys. There's a lot of potential out there, but Giger doubts whether they will live up to his expectations. Joseph, however, is sure that they will, as he has already seen it with his own eyes. The man insists that he is a rebel, but Joseph replies that they have 7 years to tame him and put him on a leash. They just have to try. At first, Joseph thought he was just a useful wolf, but he is actually a wolf chasing the moon. The next day, Jaeger takes Vlad to his room, where he finds a bed. The man comments that the other candidates are rich kids, but as long as he doesn't make any mistakes, he shouldn't have any problems. They will train twice a day after lunch and meet Ms. Oksana, Joseph's mother, who is a beautiful woman. Jaeger introduces them, mentioning that his son chose him himself. This catches the woman's attention, and she stares at him, making him blush deeply. She thanks him for saving Joseph. Vlad says he was only doing his duty, but insists that she will repay him someday. She compliments his hair, which matches his eyes, and even promises to make him some clothes, leaving the boy a nervous wreck. When she says goodbye, it's clear that the poor guy has almost had a heart attack. He admits that he has never been with a noble lady before, and Giger says that he wasn't bad for a first-timer. He then goes to the dining hall with the other apprentices. Someone spits in his soup to intimidate and mock him for his humble origins. Everyone laughs, but the protagonist just stares at the bully, throws the spit on the floor, and continues eating as if nothing has happened. The bully wonders why he's so calm, unaware that Vlad is holding back, thinking that he can't afford to ruin Joseph's reputation. In the end, the guy leaves, frustrated and threatening to haze him. Vlad simply asks his name and stares at him with cold eyes, leaving him paralyzed and completely intimidated. After a few seconds, he replies that his name is Sovanin. The protagonist leaves, telling him that he will remember him. End of chapter 14. We then move on to the leader of the Bayazids, who takes a walk through the palace until he sees that the aspirants are training hard. He decides to stay and watch, and recognizes the protagonist as Joseph's boy when he sees Jaeger secretly watching him. Keeping this in mind, he stays to analyze the protagonist's skill in a mock battle against one of Sovanin's friends who mocked Vlad. The protagonist shows no mercy, fighting as if they were on the battlefield with a fierce attitude, despite his opponent being taller than him. Lord Bayezid points out that he is careless, but he also sees that he strives to apply what he has learned. When he sees his opponent, he realizes that he must watch his movements carefully, because everything about sword fighting starts with your stance. The position of your feet, shoulders, and gaze can be used to control your opponent's movements. Vlad understands these tricks and uses them to gain the upper hand and surprise the boy with a powerful blow to his abdomen, leaving him motionless. However, the fight is not over. Vlad grabs the boy by the hair, calls him Sovanin's henchman, and mocks him for laughing in the cafeteria earlier. He then begins to beat him brutally in the face. Everyone is paralyzed, and Ragmus asks if he can fight like that. Lord Bayezid tells him to let Ragmus be because, to be a knight, you need a great spirit. Furthermore, judging by Jaeger's reaction, it seems that such brutality is permitted in this type of training. Then Sovanin intervenes and asks Jaeger to stop. Covered in blood, Vlad only apologizes and claims that he was very focused. His gaze is enough to paralyze him, and he uses this to his advantage, making a subtle threat about what he can do when he sets his mind to it. Nevertheless, he apologizes in advance, saying that he is not finished with him yet, and brings up the subject of the soup again, saying that he plans to take revenge for it. Sovanin thinks Vlad is a madman, a street dog that Joseph brought in without seeing his true colors. During dinner, Kad asks him if the beating is true, and we learn that he has got a job as the Count's stable manager. Kad insists that beating other apprentices is a crime, but Vlad reminds him that he has always been like that and that they started it anyway. Besides, that way no one will go near him. However, a boy named Portly appears and asks if he can join them. Vlad tries to scare him away, but the boy calmly joins them and says that he has been eating alone for a long time. The protagonist compliments the sausage, prompting Portly to explain that his father supplies all the palace's meat. He offers to give them some extra portions. Vlad thinks this is a bribe, but the boy literally has a whole room full of food. Then he remembers that all the apprentices come from wealthy families, so he decides to take the opportunity to make a couple of connections. Vlad invites Portly to eat with him from now on, which excites the boy, although Vlad is definitely not doing it for the meat. That's it for chapter 15. Days later, Jaeger is worried about how much work he has while Joseph's other vassals recover. He is interrupted by Sir Gregory, another knight of the Bayazids, who mocks his disgusted expression. Gregory understands that Jaeger must be busy doing everything alone, especially now that he has a vassal, but Jaeger insists that he should focus on raising his own. Jaeger is Portly's teacher and has noticed that he gets along well with Vlad, who is quite a spirit. He asks Jaeger to convince Vlad to spend more time with his apprentice. The boy is being bullied and will need protection from time to time. He promises that if all goes well, he will help Vlad whenever he needs it. Jaeger disagrees, but Gregory doesn't listen to him. We then move on to Vlad, who is having trouble mounting any horse. It's as if they're all afraid of him, which Got finds very strange. The protagonist says that he has always had this problem with animals. They seem to hate or fear him, and the only time he rode a horse was on the night of the ghost. Got points out that it was an expensive horse, but that's not the solution. He has to learn to ride a horse as soon as possible. At that moment, Oksana calls him over and gives him the clothes she has made especially for him. Looking at him now, you would never guess that he grew up in the slums. She asks him to leave some room for growth. She promises to make him more clothes for the summer, saying it's the least she can do for someone who saved her son. She also tells him that he can leave now. As he leaves, Vlad still doesn't understand why he gets so nervous around her, and he wonders how much the clothes are worth. No matter how hard he tries to fit in, he still feels like he doesn't belong. Suddenly, he hears noises coming from outside. Peeking out of a window, he sees Portly being beaten up by Sovanin's gang. They claim that they will never leave him alone, mocking his new friend and saying that shit always sticks together. Vlad watches them and concludes that people never change, they're all just bullies who take advantage of the weak. Although he doesn't say anything, his gaze betrays his intentions. That night, he approaches the badly beaten Portly and asks him for a free ham. In pain and assuming that Vlad is like the others, Portly thinks he is pretending to be friendly in order to take advantage of him. However, he decides it's better than eating alone and gives it to him. But Vlad tells him not to misunderstand, this is an advance. As the saying goes, a gentleman only takes what he's owed, and Vlad plans to pay for it by taking on Sovanin's gang in a fight of 14 against 1. Sovanin is enraged. He threatens to wipe the smile off Vlad's face and gives the order to attack. Vlad is just glad he changed his clothes because tonight there's going to be blood. That's it for chapter 16. Without wasting any time, he begins to fight the rest of the swordsmen, who fall before him like flies. They try to maintain their formation, but to no avail. Sovanin realizes that this is completely different from training. Desperate, he threatens to kill anyone who retreats. Vlad ignores the others and goes after Sovanin, asking if he has ever killed anyone. Sovanin tries to defend himself, but it's clear that he has never been in a real fight. This is when the protagonist's experience comes to the fore, with the voiceover stating that Jaeger's training does work. Gradually, he corners his opponent, closing the distance until Sovanin can't take any more attacks and falls. Vlad tries to stab him to death from above but only manages to scare him. The poor man begins to tremble and cry, warning Vlad never look him in the eyes again or mess with Portly. Paralyzed, Sovanin realizes that this is no empty threat. Vlad has tried to kill him. He accepts this, and the protagonist thinks that this has paid for the ham. He looks at the others and asks who's next, but they are scared. He concludes that, if they are not going to fight, he will have to approach them himself. He spends the whole night beating them up, observed by Count Bayezid, who thinks to himself, excellent. At the monthly Knights meeting, one group supports Rudiger's successor, another supports Joseph, and Gregory remains neutral. Anatolus, the captain of the order, announces that Rudiger and some knights are leaving on a mission. What catches the Count's attention is that Rudiger's supporters look tense and threatened, whereas Joseph's do not. This change in the normal order of things makes Jaeger happy to a certain extent and surprises him. At the end of the meeting, Rudiger's knights reproach Jaeger for bringing a rabid dog, implying that they are the masters of the idiots he beat up. Jaeger ignores them, unaware of what they are talking about. However, Gregory fills him in, mentioning that he caused a commotion and that the instructor said he couldn't handle him anymore. He offers to be available for any work they need, and Jaeger tells him he'll keep that in mind. Jaeger is proud of Vlad. He's not the only one either, as the Count sends the protagonist a gift, an impressive suit of armor. It is made of gray orc leather, which is only found in the north, and so means warrior of the north. The important thing is that Vlad has earned the Count's approval in just 1 month, surpassing every other vassal. Rumors have even spread about him, so Joseph announces that they can move on to the next step. We don't know what it's about, but Joseph then shows Jaeger a letter that excites him. Jaeger reads it and says that it's not an ordinary invitation. Joseph asks if he can reply to the letter, and Jaeger agrees, pointing out that he has been repressed. Having made this decision, Joseph announces that they will go to Dimar. Joseph agrees and points out that he has been repressed. With that decided, he announces that they will go to Dimar. That concludes chapter 17. Next, we see them setting off, and Joseph tells Vlad that Dimar is famous for its lemons and is also a key link to the central regions. We discover that the Heinel family is embroiled in a succession dispute and that their legitimate heir has invited them, essentially asking for assistance. Joseph points out that a crisis is an opportunity, but Vlad thinks the world of nobility is too complicated. In short, it is a family feud over the land of Dirmar, something quite common among the nobility, but which they can use to their advantage. The heiress is a woman named Alicia, and she is in dispute with her uncle, Andrew, who claims that she is the result of an affair. Of course, the man just wants to get her out of the way so that he can become the next Baron Hainel. They finally decided to settle the matter with a church-organized duel, for which she requested Jaeger as her representative. Considering that Alicia and Joseph are distant cousins, this makes sense, and the man wants to exploit that fact to ensure that the Heinels will be indebted to the Bayezids. Vlad thinks it's impressive that Alicia trusts Jaeger enough to leave her future in his hands. However, he interprets this as an offense and criticizes Jaeger for taking the carriage instead of a horse. Jaeger criticizes him for pretending to ask for an expensive horse just to try his luck, and Vlad has nothing to say in his defense. Vlad notices his racing heart, wondering if it's because of all Joseph's talk and Jaeger's scolding. However, the situation goes beyond that. They are in the middle of an earthquake. The knights quickly go on alert, and Jaeger orders them to stop and dismount. Everyone obeys, and at the same time, Vlad gets out of the carriage, dragging Joseph with him. He asks Joseph to crouch down. Joseph tells him it's no big deal as it wasn't an earthquake. Then they see the path of destruction formed in the ground throughout the area, evidence of a giant worm, the remnant of the fallen dragon. Vlad is terrified, but he thinks the idea sounds incredible. We then move on to Daramar, the only city of the Heinel family. They arrive at the main mansion, where Joseph informs Vlad that he will be able to move around freely with Gott and that they can travel, eat, and see whatever they want. The protagonist is surprised by how relaxed they are, so Joseph asks him to think about why he has been brought along on this adventure. Honorable duels are rare events, especially when they involve teams and knights from different backgrounds. Joseph asks him to observe the duel and find out what he can. In other words, to take this opportunity to learn more about the profession and broaden his horizons. Jaeger asks him not to get into any fights and to return at night. However, Vlad tells him that he is not that stupid, although the knight doubts it. However, he must keep them informed of any unusual movements. With that settled, Vlad begins to explore and notices that the mansion is small and somewhat neglected, as if they are experiencing financial difficulties. The strange thing is that, as he does so, his sword tenses, and a voice tells him that he has been there before and remembers the tree on the hill. Vlad decides to go there, considering that it is time to fulfill his part of the bargain and help the voice with its memories. In a large, Formal hall, Joseph meets Alicia, who thanks him for coming. He replies that helping the family with these matters is important. He mentions that his father has already given his permission, so the decision is hers. Alicia says it will be as the Count wishes, but only if they guarantee victory in the duel. Joseph assures her that there is no need to worry, as Bayezid's sword has always guaranteed victory. Having made it clear that she must not be underestimated, as she has a strong matriarchal temperament, he leaves, confirming that the plan will remain the same. End of chapter 10. Vlad arrives at the tree on the hill and comes across a small cemetery. Realizing that he would have liked to do something like this for his mother, he notices a grave that seems to be very well cared for. As a sign of respect, he cleans it and asks the voice to analyze the area for clues. He sticks his sword into the ground and begins to pray while the spirit manifests itself and tells him that some memories are returning. The memories come in fragments, a time when the tree was smaller and the feeling of having been there with someone. Suddenly, the voice senses a presence watching him and asks the protagonist to lend him his body for a moment so that he can repeat what happened that time. The voice activates his aura and, when the atmosphere changes completely, they see a giant snake staring at them, a spirit. Vlad finds it all strange and feels watched, but the spirit is actually looking at the voice inside him. Suddenly, the spirit approaches and the protagonist is afraid, but then realizes that it means no harm. In fact, it transmits a warm, safe energy, like spring. Suddenly someone approaches, and the spiritual connection vanishes along with the snake. The protagonist turns around and finds a woman who warns him that only the Hynel are allowed there. Vlad apologizes and says he was looking for a place to pray. Suspicious of him, the woman asks him to identify himself. He introduces himself as a vassal of the knight Jaeger. She confirms this with his ID, but the atmosphere between them remains tense. Vlad thinks about what to say so as not to harm Joseph and himself. Assuming she is a maid who has come to clean the graves, he asks her how he can help. Surprised, she asks him how he knows that, and he explains that he thought it was rude to pray without showing respect. Before she can speak, he grabs the bucket and starts cleaning. He asks her to ignore everything, saying that he doesn't want to upset Jaeger. She agrees, but only on the condition that he cleans thoroughly. Vlad thinks that pretty girls are always the most difficult, but he gets to work anyway while she laughs. The protagonist eventually arrives on time for Endra's night training, where he sees that Colin could break bones with a single blow, living up to his nickname, the Boar of the Middle Lands. He also sees Pablo, who is even more impressive, demonstrating excellent technique and great strength, although the real duel is tomorrow. To be a knight, you undoubtedly have to be on another level, although there are exceptions such as Sir Vorden, one of Joseph's knights. Vlad realizes that his vision in Sora was quite limited and that he still has a long way to go. The night passes and the day of the duel arrives. Vlad carefully adjusts Jaeger's armor and realizes that Endra intends to keep these lands. Jaeger insists that he pay close attention to the fight, telling him not to worry about yesterday. Vlad is surprised by this, but Jaeger is referring to the training. Watching the knights was a reality check, but Jaeger reassures him, insisting that the higher the goal, the longer the journey. Suddenly, Alicia, Lady of Hynel, arrives, and Vlad realizes that he has seen her before. Alicia is the same woman he met yesterday. The voice mocks him as he thinks, a damn it. End of chapter 19. Alicia advances towards her throne with an imposing attitude, but not before casting a sidelong glance at Vlad, her expression cold. He thinks he's in trouble because she has definitely recognized him. However, she smiles, amused by the situation, though he does not realize it. Once she is seated in full view of everyone, the bishop in charge begins the duel, the outcome of which will determine the future of Dirmar and the Hyners. It is an honorable but ruthless duel 3 against 3. Blue blood implies sacrifice, but Alicia surrenders in the first combat when she sees the state of her knight. The Lord claims that it is not over, but the bishop confirms that Alicia has given her order, and her opponent takes his leave. He says it was a good fight, which is a low blow for the man who was his teacher and taught him to protect the Hyners and not betray their heiress. He considers this a miserable fate, and the first confrontation ends in favor of Endra and his knight Chard, prompting the confident laughter of his allies. The next battle is between Jaeger and Colin. With the main rule back in force, the use of aura is prohibited. Jaeger then turns around and asks Vlad to pay attention and learn, as the lesson of the day is about to begin. Colin launches his attacks with brutally powerful blows, which Jaeger dodges instantly. Frustrated, Colin continues to attack, narrowly missing, assuming that if he keeps pressing, he will win. His plan is to attack faster and harder, which initially suggests he has the upper hand and is cornering Jaeger. This is what Endra and his henchmen assume, but Pablo disagrees and notices a strange rhythm. Colin realizes that he can't hit Jaeger, who taunts him with every attempt. His anger grows and the voice instructs Vlad to observe what is about to happen as Jaeger seizes the opportunity to exploit his desperation and destabilize him. Colin attacks again, but the voice points out that Jaeger is forcing him to fail by counterattacking, a technique involving deflecting the opponent and responding quickly. Ultimately, the pressure becomes too much for Colin, who recognizes that Jaeger is on another level, like an insurmountable wall. With great regret, Colin surrenders and Alicia claims victory, much to Endra's dismay. Jaeger calmly retreats and asks the protagonist if he has learned anything. He replies confidently that he has. This means that the last fight is the final one. Pablo, on Endra's side, will fight Alicia's protege, Jubert de Shazard. The voice acknowledges his strength, affirming that he surpasses his opponent. However, everything changes when Joubert bows to Pablo, which Joseph recognizes as a farewell gesture. At that moment, Joubert announces that he is withdrawing from the duel, leaving everyone perplexed as this means instant defeat for Alicia. Joseph's gaze fills with anger as Ender celebrates the end of the duel. He doesn't even seem surprised. It's clear that Joubert was working for him. He demands that they swear allegiance to him as the new leader of the Heinel. However, Joseph stands up and declares that it's not over. Despite Ender's blatant attempts to the contrary, Joseph announces that the Bayezid family will not tolerate this outcome. That concludes chapter 20. One of his henchmen advises him to listen because, as representatives of the North, they cannot afford to make them enemies. Ender asks what they should do. Meanwhile, Joseph believes that certain defeat is the best outcome. Keeping this in mind, he requests that the duel continue. When Ender asks if they have a replacement, Joseph replies that they have no one else to fight. Joseph remains silent but confirms that they do have someone, and votes in favor of nominating the powerful warrior Vlad of Sora in the name of Alicia's honor. Ender objects, arguing that Vlad is not yet a knight, but Joseph insists that anyone with a sword can participate. He is not at the same level as Pablo, of course, but he uses some effective manipulation, forcing them to accept and ending with him vouching for Vlad. Ender calms down, thinking that a vassal won't make a difference, while the protagonist can't believe what's happening and fears for his life. However, Jaeger assures him that he will intervene if necessary. Vlad cowers and asks what the worst-case scenario is. Jaeger ignores him, however, and Joseph approaches Vlad and gives him a surprising hug. The protagonist is surprised, but Joseph is merely asking him to wait 10 minutes. Joseph has a plan and has already started to pull the strings. He just needs to buy as much time as possible. He asks him to be careful, of course, and Vlad assures him that he will hold on. Then, in front of Alicia's nervous gaze, he kneels and faces Pablo. He introduces himself as Vlad of Sora, but the other man drops his armor without introducing himself, saying that he is not worthy to hear his name. This sparks a deep hatred in Vlad, who wonders why they always get all the beautiful, shiny things. Although he may have come from a place of no value, he has no intention of staying there. When he asks what makes them so different, Pablo replies, to his horror, that the standards of the Bayezids have fallen. Feeling confident, he also urges Pablo to ignore the rules and fight with everything he's got, as he plans to finish quickly. This fuels Vlad's anger further, and he advances, determined to shine, striking tremulously yet intensely. He's not just fighting for himself, but for someone else too. Pablo blocks, but Vlad responds quickly, aided by the voice, and everyone notices how fast he is. Even Pablo realizes that he has a natural ferocity like a hungry wolf. He tells him that he has a great spirit, but then attacks with such force that he leaves the protagonist on his knees. He tries to contain him and feels as though he is being hit with stones. Once freed, Pablo continues to strike brutally, and the voice recommends that he does not block head-on. However, he receives another attack that throws him against the wall. The knight plans to finish him off in that position, saying it's impressive that he can resist and it's a shame they met there. He tells Pablo to look for him later, then delivers the final blow. However, Vlad throws him off with an agility that surprises everyone. It's one of the counterattack techniques he learned from Jaeger. He is a vassal who has just blocked a knight's sword, so Ender assumes it was a coincidence since he cannot even lift his own sword. Pablo also wants to believe that, but at that moment, Vlad starts babbling, lost in his memories. He thinks about the sword on the wall and how he always wanted to shine. He dreams of being worthy and waiting for an opportunity to go to a bright place, a place he will fight to reach. The flower tries to bloom, and we see in Pablo's gaze that he finally recognizes his efforts. He responds strongly, and everyone stands stunned before Vald's bleeding hands. Jaeger is even surprised that he has picked up the techniques so quickly, and cannot believe that he is using them so naturally. Vlad continues to attack with unbreakable determination, amusing and exciting his opponent, who wonders what all this passion is about. He also notices that his hands are broken from the grip and feels that the sword is crying. He sees that Vlad is blossoming as a swordsman before his eyes. Therefore, he has no choice but to fulfill his duty as a knight and respond, block and parry, in battle. This translates into greater intensity. Pablo fights with all his might while they see something flowing from Vlad's sword. It is the harbinger of an aura, leaving the others stunned. Realizing this, Pablo asks for his shield and uses it to protect himself. He then introduces himself, announces that he considers Pablo worthy, and asks who he is. Vlad considers how to respond, recalling the place of his birth, a place of little value, yet full of worth, from which he emerged into the light. At that moment, something awakens inside him, his aura, screaming that his name is Vlad of Sora. The blue energy wave is so bright that everyone covers their eyes. We also see Pablo respond by activating his own aura and shouting, "Come to me." Vlad attacks, and the clash of auras is brutal. The next thing we see is Vlad falling exhausted to the ground on top of Pablo, who tells him he did a great job. Suddenly, Ender shouts that he has used his aura, which is forbidden, and that he should be disqualified for doing so. However, Pablo looks at him with disgust and Joseph thanks him for fulfilling his duty as a knight. Pablo replies that it was an honorable moment, and confirms with the bishop that it was indeed an aura. So, things change and it is time to evaluate which of the two was superior. This is all according to the code of the sword master, an honor and duty associated with royal authority that must be respected. It is intertwined with the rules of dueling, so today's incident must be reported to the Holy See and the Crown, who who will decide the outcome. The code reads as follows: all young things in this world have the right to flourish. Those who can express their potential are valuable, so all knights must protect it in honor of the Master of Swords and founding King Frozen. Next, we see Vlad waking up in pain and complaining while Joseph tends to him, asking for water. Realizing who is next to him, Vlad becomes alert and apologizes, but Joseph just asks him to make himself comfortable and if anything in particular hurts. Vlad denies it, and Joseph thanks him, announcing that, thanks to him, the duel has been postponed as the rules and code have become entangled. The protagonist recalls the voice telling him that all knights take an initial oath under this code, a promise he himself will make one day when he becomes a knight. Joseph asks the protagonist to get better quickly, as they cannot stay long. However, the protagonist assures him that he is fine. However, the voice cuts him off. Why you messed rest? Meanwhile, Alicia is frustrated because everything is being left in limbo, and she was unable to issue a warning before Endra left to await a verdict. In the meantime, the church will protect her, but that does not change the fact that dark times are ahead. Her knight recommends that she take control of Dearmar. She agrees and asks about the harvests, although we see that production continues to decline, making it clear that they need to consider new alternatives. No matter how you look at it, this is a critical moment. She then asks if the knights know how to ride horses. The man says yes, which he finds ironic since Vlad is fighting for his life while trying to stay on one. He falls off, of course, and Jaeger asks if it might work with an expensive horse. Vlad replies that it might need to be even more expensive. This earns him a hard blow to the head, and they tell him that, at least, this time he managed to get on. Got helpfully confirms this. Lauder aside, it's a serious matter. Jaeger wonders if the problem lies with the horses. They act as if something about Vlad terrifies them. In any case, Jaeger announces that that's enough for today, deciding to put off the horse issue until they find a solution. Vlad complains, but there is no easy way out of this, and they agree to think about it on the way back to Sturma. Gott points out that the horses really hate him, jokingly suggesting that he should ride a cow while Jaeger rides in the carriage. As he leaves, the voice warns him that animals are very sensitive and that he must learn to control his impulses by strengthening his aura. He is still weak, of course, so he has a long training program ahead of him in Strama, which will begin after tomorrow's farewell. He wonders if they should return to the tree. Meanwhile, let's go to Jubert, who is complaining about failing his mission and thinking that things have got out of hand. He thinks it's ridiculous that all this is for a humble vassal. At that moment, he is interrupted by Jaeger, who points his sword at his neck. Jubert tries to lighten the mood, but Jaeger won't budge. He has the whole day to teach Jubert a lesson for what he did. The pale man claims he had no choice, implying that they have the same job and only serve different masters. Jaeger knows that, but it doesn't change what's about to happen. If the master asks you to bark, you bark. It's a threat, so Jubert closes his right eye, activating his aura. Meanwhile, Jaeger unleashes his through his left eye. It looks like they're about to fight, but then the Pelomorado laughs, saying that's warning enough. He insists that they're only following orders and that spilling blood would be a declaration of war. However, he doesn't have time to finish his sentence before Jaeger hits him, sending him straight to the ground. Jaeger insists that a small bite will suffice. Jubert asks if he's finished, but Jaeger responds with another blow, knocking the wind out of him. He asks Jubert to understand why he's doing this. Jubert doesn't seem upset, and Jaeger assures him that they will meet again as Jaeger is not finished yet. Pelomorado agrees curiously and insists that the empire is crumbling. Times of war are coming. In the end, he limps away saying, "See you soon," and Jaeger agrees with him that the time is coming when the sword will be needed more than ever. Returning to the tree on the hill, Vlad comments that the snakes seem to recognize his voice. He suggests taking another look and gets into position, unleashing his energy and coming face to face with the spirit. With the spirit so close, he asks if it is a friend. Although it does not respond, the spirit begins to circle him in a friendly manner. Then the snake stares at him and moves as if to greet him, frightening Vlad, but the voice reminds him that spirits act in mysterious ways. Suddenly, the snake rises, filling the entire area with blue energy and creating a warm atmosphere. At the same time, something emanates from the protagonist's eye. He doesn't understand it, but the voice does, explaining that they have just received the spirit's blessing. The next day, Joseph and the boys say goodbye to Alicia, commenting that it is time to repair the cracks in the Heinel. She thanks them for coming and everything proceeds normally until her knight asks Vlad to step forward. Vlad is surprised, but Joseph encourages him to obey as they see that a ceremony has been prepared for him. The knight asks him to kneel and Elisa thanks him for protecting her. She says that she would not be there if it were not for him. She offers him a beautiful purple handkerchief and tells him that he is more honorable than any knight. Joseph watches everything and concludes that Alicia is a very intelligent woman, using Vlad to get closer to the Bayazids. Meanwhile, the protagonist thinks the handkerchief is too valuable, but remembers that he must accept the nobleman's courtesy, so he calmly takes it. For some reason, everyone around him is surprised. Joseph realizes that he does not understand the world of the nobility, that is not the customary way to accept a handkerchief. Placing the handkerchief on the sword symbolizes honor, whereas passing it from hand to hand represents love. Vlad did the latter, so Alicia blushes deeply. Joseph still doesn't understand anything, but tells her he'll make sure to use it properly, much to everyone's horror. In the carriage, Joseph teases him, saying it's been a long time since he's been so nervous, while Jeager scolds him for being so stupid. Joseph also congratulates him, as he is now a man hunted by a high-ranking noble woman, meaning he has been knighted.